In this video, I'm going to be sharing some insight on the short piece of music that I released last week called Sticky Date Pudding. If you haven't seen that video, then be sure to check it out. So I received some epic feedback on this piece, which I'm incredibly grateful for. So thank you very much for those of you who have checked it out and liked the piece. And alongside the video, I asked you guys on YouTube and Instagram what you want to know about the piece, like what kind of topics you want me to talk about if I were to do an insight video. So that's where this video comes in, and the most common things that people wanted to know about was the composition, the structure, the theory, and the technique. So 4 things that I want to cover in this video. Now, I've not really prepared for this video, so I'm going to try my best to condense it as much as I can, because I could really talk about all of these things for a very long time. But if you do want to watch the full-length video, which will give you a bit more of a thorough insight into the piece, then you'll be able to find that, as well as tabs on my Patreon, which is linked in the description below. And there's just one more thing that I want to mention before we proceed with the video, and that's that the original song video was played half a step down. In this video, I'm going to be playing in standard tuning to make it a lot easier for you guys to follow along to. But just bear that in mind if you want to play along with the original. So the first topic that I want to talk about is composition. How did this piece come to be? What was my thought process? How long did it take me? What was my approach? All of those little things, and whatever comes to mind as I talk about this. So I think the piece took me about 2 months to put together, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I was working at it every single day, but I was actually constructively working towards this piece very irregularly, and pretty much just when I could be bothered or when I felt inspired. So perhaps I would chip away at it for half hour on Monday and then come back to it on Friday for half hour. And I wouldn't usually spend more than half hour working at this piece, because I find, at least for me, when I'm composing or writing music, if I spend longer than half hour, my spontaneous creativity has been drained, and I'll therefore start residing on habits, finger memory, theory, and then at this point I feel like my music becomes a little bit more robotic and almost too prepared and too structured, which I mean I guess isn't a bad thing necessarily, but at least my intentions for this particular piece was for it to be as natural as possible. So I feel like when I was working on this for half hour here, half hour there, a lot of these ideas just came really naturally. And generally, of course, the genre is a reflection of the amount of finger picking that I've been doing recently. So the main part of this song, or the chorus if you like, is predominantly built around 2 basic chords, which are E major and B major. But obviously if I repeat that chord progression over and over, that's incredibly boring. So it's the embellishments and the different chord voicings that really carry this. So more specifically, I actually play an E sus2. This is just a closed position triad here. 1, 2, 5. Beautiful sound. And then we've got this little bridge between the 2 chords. Now that there is based around a second inversion of B major. We're starting on the 5th degree there. Now this note here is the 7th degree of that chord, which really wants to resolve to the root note, which is that open B string. And that leads me nicely to, and then we would have, and that concludes the first bar. So now, if you can, throughout this piece, you want as many notes to overlap as you can. That's what's going to make it sound a lot more interesting and really broaden the voicings of the chords that you're playing. So that was the first bar. Let's move on to the second anyway. So we're now going from an E sus2 to a C sharp minor. Again, slightly different voicing here. We have the 1, the minor 7, the 1 again, and then the 5. So that's just the minor 7 voicing. Now moving on to the third bar, this is exactly the same as the first. Oh, except for this one actually, it's very slightly different. Before we went, but this time, So my intentions here was to keep it similar so that the melody sticks in your head, but just slightly different to keep it interesting. So again, and then for the fourth time we change it entirely to link it to the verse. We have let me break that down. We of course start with our E sus2 as always. Now here we have our B major. I guess you could call this a B sus2 or an add 9. And then we finish on essentially an E major chord there. Again, just a slightly different voicing. And then I finish by slapping that 16th fret up here, and then that leads really nicely to the verse. Now just before I go to the verse, let's just conclude that chorus section. I'll play that whole section through for you one more time. I think the most important thing to pay attention to actually is that right hand, because sometimes I hammer on notes from nowhere, particularly the first note. So after, that little finger just hammers on, so you need really strong fingers to be able to do that. And by doing that, it's just going to make the whole thing flow a lot smoother than it would if you were to pick everything. Now, reflecting everything that we've just done, we are bouncing between the 4 chord and the 1 chord quite a lot. So we're in B major, that's our key here. As we move on to the verse section, this changes slightly to the relative minor. So now I'm playing G sharp minor, that's the relative minor of B. And the chord progression goes G sharp minor, B major, C sharp minor, and then E. With the first chord we have, that's it. Next chord. And then this is quite interesting, I like this. I really like that movement actually, and you'll find I do that quite a few times throughout this song. And the use of double stops there keeps it really interesting. The dominant melody really is just, but as you can hear on its own, it sounds really naked. And that all leads really nicely onto the next chord. That already sounds great, but then I change. Now when I was building this, I wasn't necessarily thinking about the chord at hand. I was thinking, okay, I've got the root notes. That was the main thing. I built this whole thing from the root notes. Once again, play that back if you need to really take in the technique at hand. Now I repeat that same kind of thing again, same chord progression, slightly different towards the end, but I've changed the embellishments up to make it a bit more interesting. So we start off with this G sharp minor again, and we're going to go. So I start to introduce some more double stops, and then our next chord, which is our B. Now that bit's quite interesting, and that took me a while to put together actually. I knew the destination, which is the next chord. I wanted this voicing, but I was thinking, how do I get from to there? And I figured, well, I can see a clear path here actually, and I can use patterns of sixths, double stops to my advantage by going. I like that, adds a bit of suspense and tension. And then I think that sounds cool. That's actually very hard to pull off. And then that leads really nicely into the next chord, which is of course your C sharp minor. And then I descend. It becomes very clear here when I play the root note, which is your F sharp major. And then that carries us into the next section. So once again, I'll play that super slow for you. leads super nicely into the next section, which I guess you could call the bridge or the middle section. We have in E, followed by F sharp major. So that was just an E major triad barred there. I'm playing the root note with the open E. I find that very useful when playing fingerstyle. If you have a root note available, which is an open string, use it, because it's going to allow you to create voicings which you wouldn't otherwise be able to create if you had to fret that root note. And then we have our C sharp minor 7. And then I come down here for a similar shape or pattern that we did earlier. Okay. So that's the first bar, and for this section I actually applied the same rules that I applied for the main part or the chorus, where the second bar is going to be similar, not too different though, and then the fourth bar is going to be very different, which is going to carry us back to our chorus. So the second bar, again, slightly different. So far it's the same. That's the only difference there. We're sliding up to a G sharp minor 7. And then we have this. That's actually really hard to do, to get that thumb around there. Give those notes a wiggle. And then the third time round we've got, same as the first. And this leads really nicely into the fourth time round, where it's completely different. We have let me explain what's going on there. We have an E major triad. I play a hammer on from the second to the third degree. It's a really nice resolution. And then we've got your C sharp minor. Again, this is a recurring pattern that I like. And that leads us into a beautiful F sharp major voicing. Which then carries us into our familiar before the chorus again. But rather than repeat the whole thing again, because, you know, it's unnecessary, I start off with the familiar first bar that we played throughout this entire piece. And then the second time round, I wrap it up with what would have been the fourth bar for the initial chorus, but a slightly different ending to add some kind of movement and suspense. So I go, now I can't finish there because that's calling for a little bit more. Since that's the 4 chord of the entire piece, it would be nice to finish on that root, of course. So it needs a little bit more movement, especially with the choice of chord voicing here. We've got a few clashed notes. This is your first clash, and then your second. It sounds horrible on its own, but in context it sounds great. Now I keep that E ringing at the bottom. That's droning out whilst I get my pick. So in the video I've been hiding my pick here all along. I flick that out at this point. And then we've got at least something like that anyway, which essentially is highlighting an E Lydian sound. There's your sharp 4. And then again at the end of that entire phrase, this doesn't finish it. This note's still calling for a little bit more, since that's the 7th degree of E major, which sounds horrible, needs to go somewhere. So I carry this a little bit more with some more noodling. For this very last descent, which highlights, I guess, a harmonic minor sound. There is our major 7 of G sharp minor, which is the relative minor of B, of course. So we're going to finish on wherever this is going, which is this note. That's such a relief to hear. And then I finish on this particular voicing, which is, we have your root, your 5th, your 2nd or your 9 here, 3rd, and then your minor 7. So since we have that minor 7 there, this would just be a minor 9 voicing. And there we have the whole piece. So I've shown you how to play it, and I've hopefully been able to give you a little bit of insight into the creative process, as well as some of the theory behind why this works. So I hope this gives you something to take away, and I hope I've answered some of the questions that you might have had with regards to this piece, and given you some insight into how it was made and how it was put together, why it works, some of the theory ideas, which, by the way, if you want to gain an even deeper understanding of the theory ideas here and why they work together, then I would definitely recommend that you check out my Essential Theory for Guitarists course, which is linked in the description below. And with this knowledge, this is going to give you an incredible foundation to creating music like this and understanding what flavors work together and why. You'll be able to understand inversions and how they work, as well as heaps of other awesome stuff relevant to this kind of approach. So yeah, that's all from me in this video. As I said, I hope I covered everything, but if you do have any other remaining questions, then please let me know in the comments section below. By the way, if you learn this piece and you happen to post it on Instagram, please tag me at Darryl Syms. I would love to watch you play it. I'll be sure to give it a like and a comment and all of that cool stuff. That's everything I want to say today. I will see you in the next video.